I want you to think about the last time you passed a cemetery at night. Did you look straight ahead, or did you let yourself glance at the stones? Because there's a belief gravediggers don't say out loud. Every time you look at a cemetery after dark, one name on a headstone looks back at you and learns the sound of your footsteps. So while you listen to this, make a deal with yourself. If you hear any small sound that isn't from this video, a tap in the wall, a creak in the floor, a knock in the pipes, or your phone lighting up by itself, you do not pause, you do not rewind, and you do not check the window. They say the dead can't leave the graveyard. But every once in a while, a cemetery chooses someone and goes home with them. If your name has ever been carved on the wrong stone in a dream, these stories aren't just about the dead. They're about the moment the ground decides it prefers you instead. Welcome. You have entered a spooky universe where stories never sleep and shadows never fade. Let's blend your like and subscribe into Spooky Universe. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? I've always found that question fascinating because no matter where you are, when the lights go out and the night grows cold, the same darkness finds us all. Let the shadows rise and rule. They say every small town has a cemetery that doesn't rest, a place where the dead whisper and the living pretend not to hear. Ours sat on the far edge of Miller's Hill, just beyond the tree line where the road dipped into fog most nights. No one went there after dark. Not because of superstition or maybe because of it, but because everyone who did came back, changed. The old folks used to say the ground there sank a little deeper every year, as if the earth was trying to pull the graves back inside itself. I used to think that was just small town talk, the kind of ghost story parents tell kids to keep them from sneaking out. But after what happened last October, I can't hear the name Miller's Hill without feeling that cold press of dirt under my skin. When I was 10, my friends and I used to ride our bikes past the gates just to prove we weren't scared. The gates were these tall iron things that never fully closed. One hinge was rusted through, so the right side hung open just a few inches, always creaking in the wind. I remember one of the older boys telling us it was stuck like that because the dead wanted it open. That way, they could slip out when they got lonely. Back then, I laughed it off. I don't laugh anymore. My father was buried there 2 years ago, under a crooked maple tree that never seemed to lose its leaves. I visited every Sunday without fail. It was my ritual. Bring him a cup of his favorite black coffee, pour a little into the dirt, and tell him about my week. Sometimes I'd stay longer than I meant to, just sitting in the quiet, listening to the wind moving through the grass. But one Sunday, I stayed up too late. The sun had already dropped behind the trees when I realized how dark it had gotten. The last bit of orange faded from the sky, and the air turned cold so quickly that my breath came out in little white clouds. The cemetery has a strange kind of silence at night, not peaceful, not empty, just listening. Like something's waiting for you to make a mistake. That's when I saw it, a small light bobbing between the headstones. It moved slowly, not like a flashlight someone was carrying, but as if it floated. At first, I thought maybe it was one of those solar lanterns people sometimes leave by graves. But there was no grave where the light moved. It hovered between rows, almost curious, like it was looking for something. I called out, asking if someone was there. The light froze. I swear, for a second, it turned toward me, and though I couldn't see a person behind it, I felt the weight of my eyes on me. My stomach dropped. Then, from somewhere behind me, a voice whispered my name. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. It was the softest sound, the kind of whisper that brushes your ear when someone stands too close. I spun around, flashlight trembling, but there was no one, just fog. Thick, low fog, rolling over the ground. I left. I didn't run, but every step felt wrong, like the air had gotten heavier. When I got home, I poured a drink and tried to shake it off. Told myself it was grief, exhaustion, tricks of light. But then, I noticed something strange on my phone. A new picture had been added to my gallery, one I hadn't taken. It was a photo of my father's grave, shot from behind me. You could see my silhouette in the corner, standing at the headstone. And behind me, half hidden by the fog, was a tall, dark figure. Too tall to be human, too thin. I deleted it immediately. I didn't even want to think about how it got there. But that night, the photo came back. Same image, same file name, only this time, the figure was closer. I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m, I started hearing knocking. 3 knocks, soft, almost polite. At first, it came from the front door, then the back, then my bedroom wall. Every time I checked, nothing. But in the morning, there were muddy footprints by the window, one set leading away toward the woods. The following week, I tried to avoid the cemetery. I told myself I'd just stop by next month, maybe leave some flowers then. But the thing about Miller's Hill is, it doesn't like to be ignored. 3 days later, I woke up to the smell of soil. Damp, iron-heavy soil, like the kind that clings to shovels. It filled the whole house. When I got up, I found dirt scattered across the kitchen floor. A small pile of it right by the table where I used to sit with my father. And in the center of the dirt was a coin. One of those old silver dollars my dad used to collect, but it was blackened, almost burnt looking. That night, I heard it again. My name. This time, clearer. Right outside my bedroom door. I told myself not to open it. I told myself over and over that it wasn't real, that I was dreaming. But curiosity, or maybe fear, got the better of me. When I opened the door, the hallway light flickered once, then went out. For a second, the only thing I saw was a shadow at the far end of the hall. Long, impossibly long, stretching up the wall and across the ceiling. Then it moved. Slowly. Smoothly. I slammed the door and didn't open it again until sunrise. I thought about calling someone, the police, maybe even a priest, but what would I say? That a shadow was calling my name? That my phone was taking pictures by itself? No one would believe it. So I went back to Miller's Hill. It was colder than I remembered. The trees around the cemetery leaned in over the road, like they were trying to hide it. The gates were open wider now. I parked at the edge of the gravel path and walked in with shaking hands and a flashlight that felt too weak. When I reached my father's grave, I stopped dead. The name on the headstone wasn't his anymore. It was mine. Carved deep, clean, like it had been done yesterday. My birth date was correct. The death date was only 3 days away. I laughed. I actually laughed. It was a nervous, broken sound that didn't feel like it came from me. I thought maybe someone was playing a cruel prank. But then I saw something moving near the tree line, that same tall figure, its head tilted like it was studying me. The fog thickened fast. I could barely see a few feet in front of me. I turned to run, but every direction looked the same. The path, the graves, the stones, all swallowed by that heavy white mist. I don't remember how I got home. I remember the cold. I remember the smell of damp leaves and earth in my mouth. But I woke up the next morning in my own bed, clothes still wet, shoes caked in, mud. There was another photo on my phone. This time, it wasn't at the cemetery. It was in my bedroom. Me, lying in bed. The picture had been taken from the foot of it. For a week, I didn't go outside. Didn't eat much. I taped blankets over the windows and left the lights on day and night. But on the third night, I started hearing something new. A scraping sound. Slow. Metal on stone. It came from under the floor. I followed the noise to the crawlspace door in the hallway. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the flashlight. I crouched down, shined it inside, and saw the dirt moving. Like something was pushing up from underneath. When I ran, I didn't stop until I reached the church at the end of Main Street. The old priest, Father Callum, let me in. I must have looked insane. He gave me water, listened quietly as I told him everything. I expected him to laugh or to call someone to take me away. Instead, he said quietly, "You shouldn't have gone back there after dark." He told me the cemetery was built over the old mine shafts that collapsed in the 1800s. Dozens of workers were buried alive when the tunnels gave in. The town covered the site and used it as a burial ground. But the earth down there was hollow, restless. The ones buried under the graves, he said, they were never named, never marked. They reach for the living, trying to trade places. I wanted to think he was crazy, but I'd already seen too much. He gave me a small wooden cross and told me to burn the clothes I wore that night. I did. But even after that, I'd wake up with dirt under my nails, like I'd been digging in my sleep. The death date from that gravestone came and went. I didn't die, but I don't think I stayed the same either. The people at work started saying I looked pale, thinner, distracted. I'd catch my reflection and not recognize it for a second, like my eyes belonged to someone else. Last week, I drove past Miller's Hill again. The gates were wide open. Inside, there were fresh flowers on the ground right where my father's grave used to be. Only there wasn't a stone there anymore, just an empty patch of dirt. And standing by it, half in shadow, was a man wearing my coat. He looked up as my car passed. I couldn't see his face, but I knew the shape. It was me. Since that night, every mirror in my house shows something wrong. Sometimes my reflection lags when I move. Sometimes it smiles when I don't. I've started hearing that whisper again, just before sleep, quiet and low, coming from under the floorboards. It says the same thing every time. You came back too soon. I don't know how much longer I have before it calls me back. Maybe that's what Miller's Hill does. Maybe it doesn't haunt you. Maybe it just remembers who belongs to it and waits. Excedet, exedite, 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 exedite. So, if you ever find yourself driving through Briar Hollow and you see those old gates standing open at the end of the road, don't stop. Don't even slow down. Because once you hear your name whispered from the fog, it already knows the sound of your heartbeat, and it will follow you home. Second story. I used to work nights at a cemetery. Yeah, you heard that right, nights. My friends thought I was insane when I took the job, but at the time, I needed the money. My old car had died, rent was past due, and the local cemetery, Hollow Creek Memorial, was hiring for overnight security. Easy work, they said. Check the grounds, keep out vandals, log your patrols every hour. Most nights, you just sit in your truck, listen to the radio, and wait for sunrise. The pay was better than anything else in town, so I took it. I started in early November, the kind of cold where your breath turns to smoke the moment you step outside. The cemetery sat about 4 miles past the edge of the city, surrounded by woods and a dry creek that hadn't held water in years. The only light came from a row of weak yellow lamps along the gravel road that cut through the property. The first few shifts were nothing. Quiet, peaceful even. I'd park near the caretaker's shed, sip cheap coffee, and walk the perimeter once an hour. The wind would hum through the pines, and every so often, a deer would dart across the fence line. That was the only movement I ever saw, until my 7th night. It was a little past 2 in the morning when I noticed something strange. The air felt different. Still, not the normal kind of quiet this was, like the world was holding its breath. Even the wind had stopped. I was doing my usual walk between the north and west sections when I spotted a light up ahead. It flickered just beyond the trees near the old graves, the part of the cemetery no one visits anymore. At first, I thought maybe it was kids with flashlights. I'd heard stories from the previous guard about local teens sneaking in for ghost hunts. But as I got closer, I realized this wasn't a flashlight. The light wasn't white, it was blue, pale, and cold, like the reflection of moonlight in water. It hovered just above one of the graves. I stepped closer, crunching over frost-hardened grass. My breath hung in front of me, thick as fog, and then, without warning, the light blinked out. When my eyes adjusted, I realized something was wrong with the ground in front of me. The grave it hovered over the soil looked disturbed. Not just recently dug, but moved. The mound was uneven, like something had pressed up from beneath. That was when I heard it, a soft, wet sound, like soil shifting. My flashlight trembled as I aimed it at the grave. The dirt pulsed once, almost breathing. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and ran all the way back to my truck. When I radioed it in, the dispatcher sounded half asleep. She said she'd send someone to check it out in the morning. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the truck, every window fogged, eyes locked on the tree line until dawn. By the time the day crew came in, the grave looked normal again. No loose dirt, no sign of anything disturbed. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it. That night, though, things got worse. It began with the lights. Every lamp along the gravel road started flickering, not all at once, but one by one, in sequence, like something was walking past them. The radio in my truck went to static, the kind of static that almost sounds like a voice just below the noise. I stepped out, telling myself it was a bad circuit, maybe the wind hitting the lines. But there was no wind. The trees didn't move at all. When I turned back toward the cemetery, I saw a shape standing near the same grave as the night before. Tall, thin, still. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it looking at me. I aimed my flashlight, but the beam bent through the air, warped somehow like heat over asphalt. Then it was gone. I thought about quitting that night. Should have. But I told myself I was tired, maybe, hallucinating. The following evening, my supervisor, Harold, came by for the first half hour of my shift. I told him everything, the lights, the grave, the figure. He gave me a long look, then said, "You've been out here alone too long. Happens to everyone eventually. Cemetery's quiet until it ain't." Then he laughed, like it was a joke, but his eyes didn't. Before he left, he told me something odd. Said the north section used to be part of an older burial ground, one that was shut down in the 50s when they built the highway. Most of the bodies had been relocated, but not all. Sometimes, he said, the old ones don't take kindly to being moved. After he drove off, the night stretched out again, empty, cold. Around midnight, I started hearing tapping on the truck window. Light, rhythmic, like fingernails on glass. Every time I turned, it stopped. When I finally caught it in the corner of my eye, I froze. A handprint, faint, gray, appeared on the inside of the windshield. Inside. The air inside the cab turned colder than outside. I could see my breath. I could smell soil. That's when the radio came alive again. No voice, just static. But through the static, I heard something buried deep, the sound of shovels, dirt being moved. And underneath that, a whisper, graveyard shift. Over and over, slow, like a chant. The engine wouldn't start. No matter how many times I turned the key, it just whined and clicked. The headlights dimmed until the world outside was nothing but the faint glow of the cemetery lights in the distance. I don't remember leaving the truck. I just remember standing by that old grave again, flashlight in hand, not sure how I got there. The dirt was moving again, this time faster, more violent, like something was trying to push through. And then a crack opened in the ground just enough for air to escape. The smell hit me like rot and whetstone. A voice came out of it. It said my name. I ran. When I reached the shed, I locked the door, turned on every light, and stayed there till sunrise. When the maintenance crew found me the next morning, I was sitting on the floor, still holding the flashlight. They told me I'd been there for hours, mumbling to myself. I quit the next day. But that's not the end. A week after I left, I got a call from Harold. He sounded shaken. Said one of the newer guards hadn't shown up for his shift. They found his truck abandoned at the north section. Doors open, engine running, radio hissing. No sign of him anywhere. And the grave I'd seen disturbed, it was open again, empty. The next day, Harold called again, this time whispering. He said the company reviewed the camera footage from that night. At 2:17 a.m., the guard walks up to the grave. He shines his flashlight down. Then he looks up, straight at the camera, and smiles. After that, the feed goes black. I haven't gone near Hollow Creek since, but every now and then, I get a text from an unknown number, always after midnight, always the same message. The graveyard shift never ends, and attached to it, a photo, me, standing in front of that same grave. Only I haven't been back there, at least not that I remember. Have you ever driven past a cemetery late at night and caught movement out of the corner of your eye? Maybe a flicker between the stones, or a shape just tall enough to seem human? Next time, don't look twice, because they only move when you do. And once they know you've seen them, you've already joined the shift. Third story, there's a place in northern Pennsylvania called Blackwater Hollow. It's not a town exactly, more like the ghost of one, a stretch of back road and a handful of buildings that still stand because no one's bothered to tear them down. Blackwater's claim to fame is its cemetery. A place so old the stones are half-eaten by moss and time. Locals call it the Singing Yard because, on certain nights, you can hear bells under the ground. Not wind chimes, not church bells, little bells. The kind that used to be tied to coffins back in the 1800s, when people were terrified of being buried alive. That was a real thing. Safety coffins, they called them. Each one had a string that ran from the deceased's wrist up through a metal pipe to a tiny bell above ground. If you weren't dead and you woke up in your coffin, you could tug the string, ring the bell, and someone would come dig you out. At least, that was the idea. No one's been buried that way in over a century, but the bells at Blackwater still ring. I didn't believe any of it until last fall, when I got a call from my cousin Ellen. She's a photographer, does moody black and white stuff for magazines, and she'd gotten permission from the Historical Society to shoot in the cemetery at night. She wanted me to come along, just to keep me company. She said, famous last words, right? I remember the come. Air being colder than usual for October. The kind of cold that carries sound too well every breath. Every crunch of leaves, echoing longer than it should. We parked by the rusted gate just after sunset. The place looked like something carved out of a nightmare. Crooked trees, iron fences swallowed by vines, gravestones tilting like old teeth. Ellen was excited, of course. Artists always are when they find something morbid. She unpacked her camera gear, clipped a small lantern to her jacket, and went off ahead while I followed with a thermos of coffee, trying to act like I wasn't creeped out. For the first hour, it was just photography, long exposures, fog rolling between the headstones, the lantern light making halos around her hair. It should have been peaceful, but every few minutes, I'd hear something faint beneath us, a soft tinkling, metal on metal. The first time, I brushed it off, probably the wind shaking loose something on the old fence. But it kept happening, always just as we'd stop moving. When the world went still, Ellen didn't notice it. She was too focused on her camera, but I did. And once you hear that sound, that light, trembling ring, it gets under your skin. You can't tell where it's coming from. It's like it's everywhere and nowhere at once. I tried to play it off. You hear that? I asked her. She frowned, listening, then shook her head. Just your imagination. Maybe. But then she wanted to explore the lower section, the oldest part, down near the dry creek bed. The ground there was soft and uneven, and the stones had no names left, just dates. The latest one I saw was 1851. That's when I saw the first bell. It was half buried in the dirt beside a grave that had sunk a good foot lower than the rest. The bell was small, about the size of a plum, made of tarnished brass, and it had a string, no, a wire, disappearing into the earth. I crouched down, brushing away the leaves, and saw that the wire was still tight, like it was pulling back. Something about it made my stomach twist. Ellen thought it was fascinating. She snapped a few photos and said it would look perfect in her collection, the echo of the living, she called it. She had a way of romanticizing death that I never understood. She asked me to hold the lantern while she got a close-up shot. That's when the wire twitched. I swear on everything it moved. Just a tiny vibration, like someone tugging it from below. I dropped the lantern. The bell jingled softly. Ellen thought I'd kicked it by accident. But when she bent down to check the camera focus, the bell rang again. Not a soft jingle this time, a full, sharp ring, like someone yanking the string in panic. We both froze. Then, From somewhere farther down the hill, another bell answered, and another. One after another, until half a dozen tiny bells were chiming through the fog. It was the most horrifyingly beautiful sound I've ever heard. Fragile, trembling, desperate. Ellen whispered, "Oh my God," and started recording. I wanted to leave. Every instinct in my body screamed to leave. But before I could convince her, a gust of wind tore through the trees and the sound stopped. All of it. Every bell went silent at once. The stillness that followed was worse. That's when we heard something else, a dull thud, deep under our feet, then another and another. I could feel the ground shift slightly with each one, like something was striking the underside of the earth. Ellen dropped her camera. "It's just settling," she said, voice shaking. But she didn't sound convinced. We backed away slowly, and that's when I noticed something glinting in the grass a few feet behind us. It was another bell, but this one wasn't buried. It was lying on the surface, the wire snapped clean off. The edge was smeared with something dark. Before I could process it, a voice broke the silence. It wasn't loud, just soft, low, from somewhere in the fog. "Help." We both turned toward the sound. At first, I thought it came from the woods, but no, it came from the ground, directly beneath us. There was a pause, and then again, clearer this time. "Help me." The voice sounded raw, human, alive. Ellen took a step forward before I could stop her. "Is someone down there?" No answer. Just that same faint scraping under the soil. She knelt, pressing her ear close to the ground. "I hear them," she said. "Don't." My voice came out sharper than I meant. "Get up." But she didn't. She reached down, touched the broken wire, and the moment her fingers brushed it, every bell in the graveyard rang at once. The sound was deafening. It rolled through the fog like a scream made of metal. The trees shook. The air turned colder. I swear I saw the ground ripple, graves shifting as if something beneath them was clawing upward. Ellen stumbled back, tripping over a stone, and fell. Her lantern hit the ground and went out. In the brief flash before darkness swallowed us, I saw something that still keeps me awake at night. Hands, dozens of them, pale, gray, reaching out of the soil. I grabbed Ellen and ran. I don't even know how we found the path. The fog was so thick it felt like running through water. I remember the sound of those bells chasing us all the way to the car. When we finally reached the gate, I turned back. Through the fog, I could see faint shapes standing among the graves, not crawling, not lunging, just standing, as if they'd been waiting. Each one had a bell dangling from their wrist, swaying in the wind. We drove until the sun came up, not saying a word. The next day, Ellen went back for her camera. She shouldn't have. I begged her not to, but she said she needed it for her portfolio, that it was probably still lying near the creek bed. She called me that afternoon. Said the cemetery looked different in daylight, smaller, harmless, almost peaceful. She found the lantern, broken but intact. The camera was lying a few feet away, half buried in dirt. She said she'd send me the photos that evening. She never did. That night, I woke up to the sound of a bell. Not outside, inside my house. It was faint, coming from downstairs. I walked through the living room, heart pounding. The sound was coming from my kitchen table. My phone was on it, screen lit. A new message from Ellen. No text, just a photo. It showed her face, pale and wide-eyed, lit by the camera's flash. Behind her, barely visible in the dark, was a shape with too many hands. I tried calling her. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. The next morning, I drove back to Blackwater Cemetery with 2 police officers. The fog was still thick, even though the forecast said clear skies. They searched for an hour, maybe longer. Found her car near the gate. Camera, tripod, lantern, all there, but no Ellen. They told me there were no footprints past the creek. They said maybe she got lost in the woods, maybe wandered too far. But I know she didn't. I know because when they asked me to confirm her things, I saw something hanging from the camera strap. A bell. Small, tarnished, and when the wind moved through the trees, it rang. That night, I went through her SD card. Most of the photos were normal fog, headstones, shadows. But the last 3 were strange. The first showed the empty grave with the bell beside it. The second was blurry, like she'd moved fast. You could see something rising behind her, a shape half in the ground, mouth open but filled with dirt. The third was completely black except for a single handprint pressed against the lens. I deleted everything. At least, I tried to. Every few weeks, one of the photos comes back. Sometimes I'll open my phone and find it there again. No file name, no timestamp. The picture of Ellen, the one she sent me waiting. And lately, I've started hearing it again. That faint ringing. Not just in my house now. Sometimes in my car. Sometimes when I lie in bed. It always comes from beneath. I moved states, changed numbers, threw the phone away. But the ringing follows. 2 nights ago, I heard it louder than ever. I went outside, and there in the yard, the ground was sinking. Just a small dip, like the earth taking a breath. And at the center of it, a bell. I didn't touch it. I didn't move, because I finally understood what those bells were for. They weren't meant to save the living. They were meant to call the dead back up. And they'd been ringing for a long, long time. If you ever hear bells at night, not far away, not wind chimes, but low, trembling ones that sound like they're coming from underground, don't stop to listen. Just keep walking, because someone might be listening back, and they might think you're answering. Story number 4. They say working in a cemetery changes the way you hear the world. At first, I thought that was poetic nonsense, something old groundskeepers told themselves to feel less lonely. But after what happened last year, I think they were warning me. My name's Nathan Cole. I used to work at Evergreen Memorial Cemetery, just outside the small town of Morgan's Bend, Pennsylvania. I wasn't a gravedigger or anything like that. I handled maintenance, paperwork, visitors, the day-to-day operations. The place had been around since the 1800s, built on a hill where you could see the river on one side and the woods on the other. It wasn't the kind of job I'd planned on, but after my mom passed, I needed something quiet, something still. For the first few months, it was exactly that, peaceful. There's a rhythm to the cemetery, leaves falling between stones, wind humming through iron gates, the occasional visitor bringing flowers and leaving just as quickly. I got used to the silence, maybe too used to it. The weirdness started in April. It was raining that morning, and I was in the records office going through burial logs. We'd recently discovered an entire section of the cemetery that wasn't on the modern map, a patch of ground behind the northern wall, overgrown with ivy and half-buried stones, old ones. Names faded, dates carved in the early 1900s, some earlier. We didn't even know they existed until a contractor clearing brush found a row of crumbling markers. I was told to catalog them, see if they matched any archived records. That's when I came across a name that stopped me cold. Anna Cole. Same last name as mine. Same birth year as my great-grandmother. At first, I figured it was a coincidence, a common enough surname. But when I opened the old record book, the handwriting was so faded it looked like dust. Next to her name, under date of death, the ink had run so badly that I couldn't make out a number. Only one word was still legible, written in faint blue pencil. Returned. I remember staring at it, trying to figure out what that meant. Returned where? To the grave? To the family? When I went back out to check the grave marker, I couldn't find it. The stone was there, but the name had worn away completely. I might have left it at that, an odd curiosity in a field full of forgotten names. But that night, something strange happened. I live on the property, in a small caretaker's house at the edge of the grounds. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside, not crunching on gravel closer, softer, like shoes brushing grass. I assumed it was a deer or a stray cat, but when I looked out the window, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, too tall for a child, too still for an animal, just standing there, watching the house. I grabbed a flashlight and went out to check. The rain had stopped, but the fog was thick enough to swallow the world past 10 feet. When I reached the tree line, there was no one. Just damp leaves and the smell of wet earth. But when I turned back toward the house, I noticed something I couldn't explain. Footprints, a full set of them, leading from the house to the old section of the cemetery. They weren't mine. The next morning, I followed them. They led straight to one of the older graves, the same overgrown patch I'd been cataloging. The footprints stopped at a marker I hadn't noticed before. It was covered in moss, the letters eaten away. When I brushed the surface clean, I could just make out the carving underneath. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? Hey, the grave that shares my name is being visited by a ghost? Yeah, that would have gone over well. But over the next week, small things started happening. I'd hear faint whispers when I walked the grounds alone, not words, just the shape of voices. The gates would be open in the morning, even though I'd locked them myself. Sometimes, I'd smell perfume in the air old-fashioned, like lilac water even when no one had been by in days. Then the dream started. Always the same one. I'm standing in the northern section. Fog rolling through the trees. There's a bell tolling in the distance, low and slow, like it's calling something. I look down, and the ground beneath me starts to move, not violently, just a slow rise and fall, like the earth itself is breathing. When I wake, I can still hear the bell. It wasn't until a few nights later that I realized it wasn't just in my head. I was closing up the main gate when I heard it clearly for the first time. One long, heavy note echoing across the cemetery. I checked my watch. Midnight. The bell wasn't from a church. There isn't one for miles. It came from underground. I followed the sound to the northern wall, the one with the unrecorded graves. The air was colder there, unnaturally still. I shined my light over the stones, but the beam flickered not out, just weak, like something was draining it. Then, from somewhere near my feet, I heard a whisper. "Nathan." My name, said softly. Familiar. I froze. The light dimmed again, and for just a second, I saw a hand, pale, gray, reaching up through the dirt before the beam died completely. When I came, it was dawn. I was lying in the grass, flashlight beside me, batteries dead. My watch had stopped at exactly 12:01 a.m. I told myself it was stressful, lack of sleep. I'd been working long hours, alone too much. Maybe I'd blacked out, dreaming the whole thing. But deep down, I knew better. That afternoon, I went through the archives again. There was only one mention of returned in a ledger from 1903, buried under water-stained pages. The entry was brief, written in the same faded ink. Bodies recovered from north plots due to flooding. Several graves disturbed. One missing, presumed washed out to the river. Marker replaced. Entry returned. That was all it said. I tried to find out more about the flood, but the local records office didn't have anything. It was like the event had been erased. That night, I decided to dig a little deeper, literally. I know how that sounds. But when you've spent months surrounded by silence, and that silence starts whispering your name, you'll do anything to make it stop. I went out with a shovel around midnight. The fog was thicker than usual, so dense my flashlight could barely cut through. I went straight to the grave marked A, C-O-L-E. The ground looked freshly turned. I pressed the shovel into the soil and started digging. The earth was soft, almost too soft, and after maybe 2 feet, I hit something solid. Wood. I brushed away the dirt, expecting to see the corner of an old coffin, but it wasn't a coffin. It was a box. A small wooden box, barely a foot wide. Inside, wrapped in rotted cloth, was a photograph, black and white, cracked down the middle. It showed a woman standing beside an open grave. Her face was blurred, but something about her posture felt familiar. In her hand, she was holding a bell. The moment I touched the photo, I felt the air shift. The silence deepened, thickened, pressing in like water. Then, faintly, I heard that same bell toll again. Only this time, it was right behind me. When I turned, the fog wasn't fog anymore. It was in shape, form. Someone stood at the edge of the grave. Not solid, not shadow, something in between. The outline of a woman, her features pale and soft as candle smoke. She tilted her head, and when she spoke, her voice sounded exactly like my mother's. "Nathan, you shouldn't have come back." I dropped the photo and stumbled back, the world spinning. The last thing I remember is the bell ringing one final time before everything went dark. I woke up in my bed the next morning, clothes clean, boots by the door. The box was gone. So was the grave marker. I called the office, asked if anyone had been working overnight. No one had. They said the northern section was closed off, now structural. Issues, sinkholes forming after heavy rain. I haven't gone back since, but sometimes, when I drive past the gates at night, I see her. A woman in the fog, standing by the northern wall, bell glinting faintly in her hand. I keep telling myself it's just my mind filling in the dark. But deep down, I know what I saw. Because sometimes, When the wind hits just right, I hear her voice again. Soft, close, familiar. Nathan, the silence keeps what we leave behind. If you hear your name in the next 3 nights from the hallway, from the window, or from that place under the floor you never look at, you don't say, "Who's there?" You already know who's there. Somewhere, a headstone is testing your name for weight. If you want to keep walking this graveyard with us, follow Spooky Universe. Let the shadows rise and rule. And tell me in the comments, which would scare you more, seeing your name on a headstone that shouldn't exist, or hearing it whispered back to you from the dark? Sleep carefully. The dead may rest, but the places we leave them in never do.